Well, here we are. We are on the last module of our course together. And so at this point, I'm going to take advantage of this opportunity to give you my own personal prescription for what it takes to make an effective mathematics classroom. As we go through this, what you'll find is it's going to be making use of a lot of the key ideas from the course. And so if these are not familiar or if you don't remember them as well as you would like, I would encourage you to go back and review the videos and the supportive documentation throughout the different modules. Um, when we put all of it together, I think what you'll find is you really do have a very powerful set of tools in your toolbox to help you not only be effective as a teacher, but to help your students so that they can learn both the procedure and the concept. And in doing so, you'll be able to enable them not just to be able to solve problems that other people give them, but to generate and pose their own problems. And this is an incredibly important skill in today's information economy, where we have students who must be able to identify the roots of a problem, to model it mathematically in an effective fashion, and to come up with solutions that they understand, because often the problems our young people are going to be facing are those that have never been addressed before. And so we can't just Google for a correct answer. You have to be able to understand on your own why the mathematics and the mathematical modeling is correct. So now back to the prescription. I realize I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't write you a medical prescription, but I am a math methods doctor, and so I certainly can write you a prescription like this. Let me show you what I have in mind here as a way of generating, running, and evaluating an effective mathematics classroom. So here we are. This is Dr. Connell's prescription for an effective math class. The first thing that we will find out here is that it's a cycle. It's not something that we do once and it's done. It's an ongoing cycle of activities. And so we will start here at the top where we're talking about new topics. And as we start with a new topic of instruction, we initially have to do some pre-testing and some grouping based on that pre-testing. We then will progress on to the instruction itself. We'll have a certain set of instructional focuses that we'll talk about, and then we'll establish the post-test that we then use to build our new topic. And so this cycle is one that will be repeated again and again and again throughout your work with your students. First of all, whenever we talk about a topic, at least within the state of Texas, we understand that we're talking about the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, the TEKS, or the TEKS. I always like to pronounce it as TEKS because I don't believe we live in Texas. I believe we live in Texas, but many people pronounce it TEKS, and I'll respect that. Whenever you accept a teaching position in Texas, you realize that you are contractually obligated to teach the TEKS. So please make sure that you're familiar with them, that you have kind of a general sense of both the procedural TEKS, in other words, what the students can do, and the conceptual TEKS, which is the understandings they have to have. You want to make sure that you also are familiar with the professional standards, that you understand both what you should be teaching and how you should be teaching it. I want to make sure you have the success that you deserve when it's time to take those licensing exams. In looking at the TEKS, you also may want to refer back to that handout I gave you at the beginning of the semester, where we give you the grade level bands and how the TEKS spread out across these grade levels. As much as you might say, I'm going to teach third grade, you don't know that until you get your first contract. And so you really owe it to yourself to be familiar with the content that you're going to be expected to teach. Along with that, this semester, I hope I've built a case for you that you need to be familiar not just with the concepts, but the process as well. So if you understand how to get a correct answer, but you don't quite know what it means, well, then you focus on the concept. If you understand conceptually, but you don't know how to get a correct answer, you need to focus on that. You need to be in group 1, to use our Sigma metaphor, for everything you're expected to teach. And so ethically, if I were being hired to teach 6th grade, I would go through the TEKS and I would identify those areas that I might have personal weakness in and go back and reteach myself, both conceptually and procedurally, until I am master of those TEKS. I don't think that that's asking too much. So be sure when you go forward that you identify the TEKS, that you become familiar with them, both conceptually and procedurally, prior to attempting to teach the students. And remember, you can't teach as a teacher something you haven't learned as a learner. So you may need to go back to Van de Waal. You may need to go back to some online resources. You may need to go back to some of your notes from this class. The TEK you select for teaching should be something that you have mastered both procedurally and conceptually. It should also be something that's grade level appropriate based on the grade that you're going to be teaching. Now, once this is done, you're going to be doing a pretest and some grouping. And this is where the segment placement grid shows up. If you remember, when we walked our way through this, we select an interview item. We then check initially to see if the students are able to get a correct answer. And this can be done very easily through a paper and pencil assessment. We then ask ourselves for each student whether or not we feel that they understand the concept. And this will generate 4 types of mathematical thinking. Our group 1, which is where we really want everyone to be, and that's having both process and concept. Group 2 would be having a process only. Group 3 is having neither process nor concept. And group 4 is that rather interesting group that in many cases has GT students in it, that you have concept, but you really don't have an effective process yet. In going through this, we're going to be keeping track of which students are in which group. And a nice way of doing this is to just get a copy of your class list and give an assessment, give a paper and pencil test. Ask yourself if they met the criterion for having the process. Typically that's 70%. If they were, then you just put a little check next to their name. And then ask yourself whether, based on your observations of these students on prior topics, of your working with those students and looking at what they're doing, or they're just answering, how can you tell whether or not they have the concept? Put a little check next to them. That way you'll know if they have process, they know if they have concept, and you can put them into the appropriate process concept group, group 1, 2, 3, or 4. Once they're in the group, you're going to be starting actual instruction. And whenever we go through instruction, we're going to be making use of the action on object cycle. And we've hit this all throughout the semester. I truly hope you don't need too much review on this, but just for the sake of completeness, the first step is, of course, to determine what developmental level our students are going to be operating on. In particular, generally early childhood through probably 3rd grade, we're going to be thinking mostly at the manipulative level. So there I am, I'm now looking at manipulatives. If I'm at 4th through 6th grade, I am probably going to be thinking more with sketches. If I am at middle school, I might begin to be making use of mental pictures effectively. And then finally, if I am at the high school or college level, I'd be functioning in the level of pure logic, pure abstractions. Now, this is not to say that we can't use abstractions as a record of action, but only if it's meaningful for the student. Remember numerical fluency, we could use symbols to record our work, but it has to be grounded on something that's personally understandable on the part of the student. If it's not grounded in that level of understanding, what you're doing is you're just substituting one level of memory recall for another. Speaking of which, memory recall. After we've selected the level that we're thinking with, let's say manipulatives, we would then talk about vocabulary. And we've referred to that as memory recall, knowing that there's more to vocabulary development than just association. But again, for our purposes, if a student can identify a thousands block when we ask them to show 1,000, that's going to be enough for our work. Once that vocabulary is in place, of course, we then get to ask a problem. We have a teacher-posed problem. And whenever we have a teacher-posed problem, there's a cycle that we go through where we have an activity. And then based on that activity, as teacher, we'll help them organize their work. And perhaps we might use some technology to help in that organization. For example, we've modeled using spreadsheets. So you could use databases, you could use pictures, and so on. But once it's organized with a purpose. And the purpose is to generate a formalized record of action. I think we've given enough examples of how that might be done, but a big takeaway here that you need to remember is that the record of action should look like the traditional procedure that you'd expect to see taught in a textbook. This way, when our students go home, they'll have the support of their family and their community in helping them work through problems that we might send home as homework, even if the parents or the other members aren't as familiar with the modeling that was done in the classroom. Mathematical modeling, of course, can be done in one of two ways. We either model the mathematics, which we can use with the base 10 blocks, with physical objects, with sketching and so on. Or it can be used to model real world events using mathematics. So when we model something, remember what we did when we had the pendulum waves, how you experienced something, you identified variables, you selected data, you made sure that it was sensible, and then based on that data, you were able to come up with some ideas about what might be done. Mathematical modeling is an important part of our teaching because it's at that level that we start saying, how are we going to use the manipulatives, or how are we going to use this sketch, or how are we going to use this graph? Once we know the teak and we know the developmental level, then we know what we can model with. Can we model with hands-on materials, or can we model with sketches? And I'm going to suggest that for our students in the elementary level, you should not be trying to model with mental pictures or abstractions. You've got to build those foundational understandings using the manipulative and the sketch. Then we're going to think about our instructional focus. And when we think about what we've done, here is where we want everyone to be. We want everyone to be in group one. Group one is our group that has both the process, they're getting correct answers. They also understand the concept, and so they're in really good shape. This is the group we'd like everyone to be in. Group two, unfortunately, is the most common group out of our four. These are students who were probably taught very traditionally in a memory recall fashion where they just memorized a bunch of rules and procedures. And I think I've indicated to you that's not the worst situation in the world because at least they're getting a correct answer, but it's not the best situation either. This group going forward will probably opt out of mathematics around college algebra. And so they really won't get into math per se at the university level to the degree we'd like. This group, group one, since they understand it and they're getting correct answers consistently, they tend to go through the calculus without too much problem. Poor group three, though, they opt out sometimes by the time they hit fourth grade. And so clearly we want to get our students out of group three at all possible costs. We need to spend a great deal of energy working with those students. Group four, if you remember, this is our potentially GT group. They've generated their own understandings in addition to or in replacement of those that were formally taught. They have a great deal to offer in our classrooms, provided we take advantage of it, provided we recognize what they can offer and we make use of that in our instruction. So in our instructional focus, again, we made recommendations in terms of grouping these students together, in particular, to group groups 2 and 3 together and to group groups 1 and 4 together. We spent quite a bit of time talking about how 2 and 3 should be the focus of concentrated instruction on concepts, and how groups 1 and 4 can now do some extension work, and they can also talk about helping support one another, where group 1 can support with procedural items, group 4 will support with these unusual ways of thinking about the concepts. Now, I'm going to unpack a little further for you what the classroom can look like to help you build a classroom where this can take place. So here we are, we're up at the front of the class now. And the first thing we have to remember is we have these 4 groups of students, groups 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would challenge you to try to remember what the characteristics of each group are right now. And when we do that, we're going to start creating these working groups. Now, as you remember, in a math classroom, since we're using a problem-centered approach, because it's a problem, there's an ideal group size. No more than 4, no less than 3. And so to the extent possible, we're going to be grouping our students so that they're in groups of no more than 4, no less than 3, and you'll look what we've done here. We've set up our group so that we have members of group 1 and group 4. Now we're going to continue and see what this looks like as we add more groups. And very rarely are you going to have more students than this that fall into groups 1 and 4. I'm really laying out a pretty good sized classroom for you here. And so these are going to be on the outside edge of the classroom, if you will. When we look at our groups of groups 2 and 3 students, you'll notice what we're doing is we are grouping again, groups 2 and 3, but we are placing them towards the inside of the classroom. So what I've done is I've generated kind of a workspace here where as teacher, you'll notice I'm right in the middle. I'm between the groups 2 and 3. That's where I'm focusing. And we know that in instruction, the most difficult thing to teach is the concept. And so by focusing on the concept, we're going to be right there in the middle of these students who need this the most. And so this way they're getting their needs met. This is probably the first time students in group 2 will have received this type of concentrated conceptual focus. And so they can help us get the procedure in place for group 3 students. The group 3 students can benefit from the concentrated instruction on concepts. So as teacher, we are really focusing our energy here. You'll notice that our groups 1 and 4 are kind of out on the edges here, but I can still watch them. As teacher, we can look and we can see what they're doing. We can keep posing questions, additional problems, asking, how can you tell? What would happen if? Can you generate your own problems? Remember the student posed problems as part of the action and object cycle. This is the time where this comes to play. They can be generating new problems that they figure out how to solve. And then we can cherry pick the best problems to use with our groups 2 and 3. Again, a lot of synergy that's possible here when you start thinking about how to make this work in your own classroom. Now, we have kind of a weekly plan of instruction that we'd like to follow each week, and this makes use of the problem-solving board. So in looking at our instructional plan, what we do is each day we're going to demonstrate a problem using the problem-solving board. This is something that we'll do as teacher. So as teacher, we're going to demonstrate each day a problem-solving board-based problem. So here I am. I'm demonstrating the problem-solving board. And it seems a little awkward at first, but with practice, you can get where it takes about 1 minute to 2 minutes per problem. And you're going to be consistent. You're going to go through the modeling using the ideas of POLIA, identifying the data. What are the knowns? What are the unknowns? What are the conditions? What type of operation are we going to solve? And we're going to be modeling that in the what does it look like section using models that are developmentally appropriate. And so we've already made that decision. We know the manipulatives we're using. We know the sketches that we're using. We want to make sure when we model the problem that we show what it looks like and model for our students how to do that in the problem solving board. When we come down to devise the plan, the what should we do? Please remember to use complete sentences. What a complete sentence does is it requires you to use linguistically both a noun and a verb. And so when we translate that into math talk, the noun corresponds to the concept, the verb corresponds to the action. And when we do this, we make sure that conceptually our students are getting both the action and the object for full mathematical understanding. So every day they're getting this. They're getting an expert modeling for them how to use this method of problem solving. At least 2 or 3 times a week, have a group of 4 solve a problem that you've selected and to show their work using the problem solving board. You've had a lot of experience this semester in terms of solving problems on your own. And you've had a lot of experience to some degree in working together in your breakout rooms to solve problems in groups of 4. In the classroom, typically it's a little easier when you have them actually seated together in working groups. And you'll notice that these are not just random working groups, they've been pre-selected. Groups 1 and 4, groups 2 and 3. When they've solved a problem, they can do it whatever method they would like initially, or they could do the problem solving board itself, solve it right on there where that's the object and the record of action. When they're done, however, you want their final record of action to be put down on the problem solving board. And I would encourage you to collect these. And you can even make a book, if you will, where you scanned all the different problems that have been solved, make that available to your students as a PDF, and then they have this resource so that they can go back and see how did we solve problems like this in the past. And because it has a full explanation, they can go back and recapture not only the concepts involved, but also the procedures that were followed and how that was evaluated. Finally, at least once a week, you need to be a bit of a Grinch, if you will, and you need to give them homework. And this is to ensure that they have the opportunity for individual accountability. And in particular, you're going to have them turn in not just the correct answer, but the problem-solving board showing their work. So what does this prescription give you? Well, it gives you a daily review of what the problem-solving board looks like when it's done by an expert. So you're modeling expert performance. We're taking advantage of the notions from Vygotsky that we are learning better when we learn together, and we are scaffolding that instruction very carefully so that we have students of these various thinking styles working together, so we get that synergy, we get that positive feedback across the board that enables us also to focus on developing concept with groups 2 and groups 3. Finally, we're developing individual accountability by requiring them to do homework at least once a week, where they have the opportunity to try things out on their own. And when you take a look at the problem-solving boards they'll turn in, what you will find is that they will definitely be able to show you whether they understand or whether they do not. Finally, we have to go back and be honest with ourselves. We need to give a post-test. How well did we do in teaching? We'll use the Sigma placement test again. We'll record what groups each of our students are now in regarding to these concepts that we've just taught, and we'll make a permanent record of that growth so that we know where they're at. We use this information to plan any necessary remediation. because we want everyone in group 1 to the extent possible. We also use it when it's time to plan our next topic. And so again, now you see we have this cycle. Now we're back at the beginning where we've picked up a new topic and we are using that topic for our next instructional cycle. I want you to bear in mind when you get into the classrooms that this prescription might seem a little difficult at first, but it will work. No question. We've taken schools from being in need of remediation to exemplary in less than a year just by using this approach in the classrooms. Remember what you've learned this semester. You're going to be awesome. And please feel free to contact me at any time, even if the semester is over. Please feel free to contact me. I love hearing your updates, your news, what it is you're working on. You know, it's amazing how many of my former students have turned out to be teachers of the year. I've had a couple of students at the doctoral level who've become deans of instruction at major universities. I enjoy keeping in touch, so please let me know how things go for you. And now I'm going to give you a little bit of advice for whatever it's worth. As the old saying goes, this and $5 might buy you a Starbucks, but I'm still going to offer it up for whatever it's worth. First of all, be gentle with yourself your first year as a teacher. You need to survive. You cannot make a change in a system you are not a part of. So let me encourage you to, the degree possible, be gentle with yourself and accepting of what you are able to do. You want to make sure that you've done the very best job you can, obviously, but don't beat yourself up. If you were perfect, you'd be a master teacher. You will be a master teacher, but it'll take time to get there. So year 1, be gentle with yourself. Year 2, pick one content area that you want to become an expert in. And when you become an expert in this content area, then you will be able to make more of a contribution for your students. They'll be able to understand even better what it is you're trying to teach. So year 1 is survival. Year 2 is becoming an expert. Year 3, become a resource for your team. Most schools have teams that plan instruction together. By your 3rd year, you should be a productive member of that team. By year 4, what I would expect is that you're volunteering to serve on some school curriculum committees, in particular textbook committees. That's where you really can make an impact by selecting textbooks that will allow you to teach both the concept and the process. At this point, you have the skills, but you may not have the street credibility, if you will. Acquire that in your first 3 years. So at the end of 4 years, look where you are. You're not burned out. And you probably have seen the research as well as I have about teacher burnout in the first 3 years. Don't burn out. You can tell I just don't want you to burn out. What happens is you can be such a force for change if you can remain part of the system. Now, if you make a professional choice saying, you know, this is not for me, well, then make the professional choice, but don't make it be because you've burned out, because you're just not successful or for whatever reason. After 4 years, you're now at a point where you're master of your craft, you're making feedback to your instructional team, you're making suggestions at the textbook level. Who knows, you might even become a district curriculum specialist. I've had students who've taken that route in a lot of districts. But it wasn't due to burnout, it's because you've stayed part of the system. Now, year 5, who knows, maybe you might want to get a master's or a doctoral degree. This is a worthy goal. I think that you should be questioning at this point whether you want to do it administratively or from a curriculum perspective. Again, though, at each point, there's continual progress, there's continual growth. The thing about education is that you have a lifelong commitment to learning as a learner so that you can better teach as a teacher. The last piece of advice that I would give you, is to remember that we are all here together to help one another, to support each other, whether we're little people trying to learn for the first time or big people trying to become the best teachers we can. It's essential, if we're going to move forward, that we help one another, that we learn from one another, and that we strive together to meet the challenges that are in front of us.